Australia and United States Weed Comparison and Contrast by Travis Wichensteiger, a senior in agronomy at Iowa State University online campus. So the outline for this presentation is going to be looking at the similar problems in the United States and Australia when it comes to weeds. We're going to look at weed management in Australia and the US, how they compare, how they contrast, and we're also going to look at equipment in Australia and the United States that is used to control weeds. So Australia and the United States, they share many similar problems, those being herbicide resistance, weed species problems, and how to manage weeds. First, let's look at herbicide resistance. This is a problem that is rapidly evolving throughout the years. Unfortunately, it is becoming more of a problem than it has in previous years and doesn't look like it's going anywhere soon. In fact, Australia is known as the herbicide resistance capital of the world, and they seem to be about 5 years ahead of the US. And they're one of the countries that had this problems first. This is because it's a high producing crop area in a small geographical area. This has sped up the process of herbicide resistance in Australia. Also, spraying to not completely kill the weed is not good, as it allows the weed to be herbicide resistant. This was done because farmers wanted to couldn't really afford it as much, so they had to spray below label. In the US, there are 17 glyphosate-resistant weeds currently, and that number is constantly rising. Also in the US, we have a corn belt that is known to have a really bad crop rotation and weed management because we only have corn rotation really in Iowa, but corn, soybeans in the corn belt. And these are millions of acres that Roundup is just constantly sprayed upon. Well, eventually the weed will become resistant to that. According to Bob Hartzler, the ISU weed scientist, he says that you could not design a better system for the survival of weeds. So looking at some of these weed species. In Australia, they add 20 new weed species to its invasive plant list each year. And that has a list of over 1,700 weeds, and groups are constantly trying to get more weeds added to that list to try to help them economically, environmentally as well. But there are many invasive non-native weeds in Australia, and these are brought in actually on purpose. They're brought in for gardens and ornamental reasons, and they get out of hand and they become invasive, become a problem. So in Australia, wheat's a really big deal. It's a really big crop. So two weeds that cause the biggest issue to Australia's wheat is the grape brome and the barley grass, and these can affect up to 40 to 60% of Australia wheat yield. In the United States, invasive weed species are spreading really fast, especially in the western United States with the open range land. 4,600 acres a day are taken over by invasive weeds. That's a really high number. Also in the U.S., we have the same problem as Australia does when many invasive weeds coming in. Our biosecurity really needs to tighten up on these issues. We need to be smarter about this. Palm amaranth, a nasty weed, is actually native to southwestern United States. And that's the plant there that I have pictured at the ISU Research Farm. You can see there's a lot of seeds on it, over 100,000 seeds on that plant. It's also a very tall plant. I'm 6'5", and it looks like that plant might be over 7 foot. So that's bad. That's hard to kill, and unfortunately, it was planted in Iowa as a CRP crop mix. So that looks like it's not going anywhere soon in the United States. So, managing weeds. In Australia, it costs them up to $4 billion a year to manage, and affects their crop yield as well. But, according to Bayer, Australian farmers pay 27% more per acre to manage weeds. I've seen other places that number is close to $100 per acre in some crops. So really just, sometimes I guess we don't realize as U.S. farmers how maybe well off we have it and how we should be thinking ahead. Well, Australian farmers, they've had to adapt to mechanical and culture ways to manage weeds. They've had to because herbicides just weren't cutting it anymore. But in the United States, it's estimated to be $20 billion per year, mainly because we have a wider landmass where we grow crops. It's a higher number. But it could lead to dangerous times when managing weeds if we don't manage our weeds. According to Michigan State weed extension specialist in our soybean fields and our dry soybean fields, if we don't manage our weeds, 71% of our yield is lost. And according to Arkansas weed scientist, he said he might figure it out with how to control primary amaranth. It's plant cover crops, specifically rye. Fortunately, it won't. Unfortunately, you don't see very many cover crops planted out in the countryside these days. So maybe the U.S. isn't taking managing weeds as seriously as they need to. But in Australia, they have. But they only started doing that because they absolutely had to. Will we start doing that in the U.S. before it's too late? Probably not, because we have no new market here in the Corn Belt of corn soybeans. And it takes a large market, 3 million plus acres. There doesn't seem to be anything like that out there. So keys to managing your weeds is to know your weeds, know your field. Mix at least 2 effective sites of action in your boom spray if that's what you do, and do this at the right time and the right labeled rates. Be ahead of your game. Be prevention, lowering your seed bank to eliminate all weeds. You can do that by pre-emergence herbicide, cover crops, crop rotation, etc. So the big difference in these countries, in Australia and the United States, in managing their weeds, is growers in Australia have taken control of the weed problem. They've been preventing lowering their weed seed bank. In the U.S., maybe we're waiting on that industry to find a solution. The farmers need to step up and find that solution before it's too late. So we'll look at some of this equipment. Australia, they have a Harrington seed extractor that was designed by an Australian farmer. Been pretty successful. It crushes a lot of weeds. It does a good job. The boom sprayer also is in Australia and is large-scale farming. It's effective, but also costly and maybe not most environmental friendly. In Australia, there are several smart ag equipment businesses that are trying to spot spray. One of them, Swarm Farm. It's a company that looks like it has the money, has the resources, and it will take off on spot spraying and robotic spraying. In the U.S., we have boom spraying. I'm pictured there on the left, spraying a bean field. And we can do this through precision ag as well by spot spraying weeds on the boom sprayer. But in the U.S. too, we have companies that are trying to figure out this herbicide resistance problem. One of them is a weed zapper. It's based out of Missouri. The problem with this, though, is the cost is high and it's slow. It only does 12 acres an hour, so you really can't get your job done that well. There's a YouTube video link there if you want to look more into that. So in conclusion, weeds are a major economical and environmental problem in both countries. They both need to stay on top of this. Herbicide resistance is also a problem. It's not going anywhere. Farmers need to stay on top of this, and the industry as well needs to continue doing research. New weeds continue to emerge as problems. Biosecurity needs to be stepped up in each country. We need to be smarter about this. The cost of managing weeds. It's a science. More research needs to be done. Equipment approaches of both countries. More practices need to be coming up as smart ag technology companies are doing this. And both countries, they have a weed problem and they need to practice effective weed control methods. It takes all the tools in the toolbox to control your weeds. There's my references. Please, there's any questions if anybody has any. Thank you.